very dramatic. I've been told not to talk. I'm now allowed to talk. So, I've done a lot of public speaking, but I've never been in an audience where there was a group of pirates. And I was like, I've lost completely what I'm gonna say. But anyways, I love that you came in. That's so great. Anyways. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dave Raymond. I'm the Executive Director of the Des Moines Public Library Foundation, so very happy to have you all here. I'm just curious, we're starting the second half of what is now the 25th anniversary. Who is here for their first AViD of this series tonight? Wow, okay, so thank you very much for coming tonight. It's a beautiful night out, glad to have you here. Want to mention a couple of things before we get going. My job is to help make sure that we're able to provide programs like this. So AViD does happen completely because of sponsors and donors. There are 15 of those different organizations or households who are making that possible this year. A few of them are here with us tonight, so a quick round of applause and appreciation for their support. There's a lot that I could and would love to share about the foundation. I just want you to know that we help provide all the funding for basically 90% of the program that the Des Moines Public Library offers. That includes things like the summer reading program that touches 10,000 kids. So a program like that would not exist without that outside support. So just want you to be aware of that and how important the foundation is to sort of the vibrancy of the library. The other thing I want to mention, if you've been paying attention at all to social media or news media, is there's some with the city budget and potentially some impacts that could happen to our library system here in Des Moines. So especially if you are a resident, if you're just willing to be an advocate in any way, shape, or form, for everybody that is different, but if you could somehow raise your voice, express your love and support for the library, we would really appreciate that. So normally I'm asking for money. Tonight I'm just asking you, if you care about the library, please do what you can over the coming weeks and months to just be vocal about how you, your neighbors, your family uses the library and how much it means to you. We really hope that we can get through these cuts with the minimal amount of impact as possible. On that front, just two things that I'll mention. This coming Monday, the City Council will be hosting essentially a public work session. It's at 7:30 in the morning. Not super convenient for everybody. Happen to be a morning person or have a little bit of time on Monday morning. It starts at 7:30 in City Hall over here on Locust Avenue. You're more than welcome to come and just show your support there visibly. Also, Melissa McCollum, who's the director of the Des Moines Public Library System. She's going to be hosting a series of community conversations at each of the branches. You can go out to dmpl.org and look on the calendar of events. Those start, I want to say tomorrow. John, can you help me? Basically over the next 10 days. So if you want to attend one of those, that's also a way to kind of raise your voice and see what you can do to help. Now we'll move on to tonight because you're here to have fun, right? Whether or not you're in a pirate costume, I think you're here to have fun. So, all right. Anyways, a couple quick bits of housekeeping for you. There was a feedback form sitting on your chair. Feedback helps us with AViD. Your feedback about the night and the experience, how we can make this better for you. So please fill that out if you can. There's also the option to do that online, and you can see that in the program. Shannon and also Linden, I believe, our moderator, will both be signing books afterwards. So the signing will happen out here in the hallway. Beaverdale Books is here, if you didn't realize that. 10% of every book that you purchase comes directly back to help support the library. So we're really grateful for Beaverdale Books and Hunter for their support. I'm almost done talking, I promise. Now I'm going to introduce our moderator for tonight, which is exciting. Linden Thompson is going to be our moderator. Linden actually works for Des Moines Public Library at the North Side branch, but they are also a very prolific author. Linden writes stories about queer kids and teens discovering themselves and having adventures. Linden has published 2 books for middle grade readers, The Best Liars in Riverview and The House That Whispers, and also a book for young adults, Devils Like Us. So if you would, please join me in welcoming Linden.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. So again, I am both a Des Moines author and also a Des Moines Public Library worker. This is getting to moderate tonight as one of those extremely cool places where my two jobs overlap. And I get to do incredible things like chat with Shannon Chakraborty and chat in front of all of you. Before we get into introducing Shannon, I just wanted to talk a little bit. The Des Moines book community, we've been talking tonight, is so outstanding, right? For a metro of our size, the literary community that we've got here is really incredible. And it's really cool that I get to both see that, on the day-to-day at the library desk and interacting with readers and folks coming and checking out their holds, and then also getting to experience it from the author side. I've published several books for kids and teens, as Dave said, including Devils Like Us and Devils We Know, which is not out yet. The sequel is coming out in June. And it's a queer young adult historical fantasy that takes place largely at sea, which is why I got tapped on to moderate for this specific event. My research was, focused on a very specific window in the early to mid 1800s, mostly in the United States, mostly in New England. Tonight we get to go farther back in time to the 1100s, right? To kind of the world centering on the Indian Ocean and the many cultures and peoples and locations and this whole world around this other pocket of maritime history. So I'm really excited to get to chat about research and writing and the process. Just the depth of Shannon's knowledge and research is frankly incredible, and I know that you all also will have questions. So a little bit of housekeeping. On your chair, then you should have a piece of paper for the Q&A. We're going to chat for about half of the evening. And then at about the 30-minute mark, then there will be volunteers coming around and collecting those papers. Aaron's got one in the back. So make sure as questions come to you, if you've already, if you came in a pirate costume and have questions in mind, amazing. If questions come up as we're talking or, you think of things you'd like to ask, please make sure that you get those questions down and hand it in. Because this is also your night and you should get to, be part of this conversation as well. We have a fantastic community here, and I'm really excited for everybody here. And then after we're finished with the Q&A portion, then again, Beaverdale Books is going to be selling books, and Shannon and also I will be out in the hallway signing, so stick around for that as well. I'm really excited to announce our author of the evening. Shannon Chakraborty is the author of the AViD trilogy, an epic fantasy series that received wide critical acclaim, as well as the New York Times bestselling The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. Her books have been nominated for the Hugo, Locus, World Fantasy, Crawford, and Astounding Awards, have been translated into over a dozen languages. And the second book in the Amina al-Sarafi trilogy, The Tapestry of Fate, just released this week, 2 days ago. So we will be celebrating that tonight. Obviously, we will be avoiding spoilers and not talking about plot things, but getting to talk about kind of broad themes and some of the things that you are in for. So please welcome to the stage Shannon Chakraborty. I brought a water bottle and then I left it on the floor, but I've got one here too. So this is not your first experience of writing a trilogy or writing a multi-book series, but as someone who is in the process of, I'm about to publish my first book that is a sequel or that is a part of a duology, I am so curious about kind of your thinking about going into this. I think that it's a tricky balance with book twos of creating a book that is both, readers found this magic in the first book, right? You brought so many readers in, Readers come in with all of these expectations. And so you want to harness that, everything that readers loved about the first, but also you don't want it to feel like a rehash and want to keep it interesting and exciting for you. So kind of what was your approach going into Tapestry as you were, thinking about where this trilogy was going to go and going into the second book? What was on your mind?
First, I just want to thank everybody who came out tonight. This is my first time in Des Moines, and it's good to see a bunch of faces. I really appreciate it. Yes, so The Adventures of Amina Asarafi is my second trilogy. And my first trilogy, the AViD trilogy, it felt like all of those books were telling somewhat of a more unified story. And with Amina, I wanted to do something a little different. Of course, a trilogy, they're all kind of building up towards one big thing, but I wanted each book to feel like a contained adventure, like something you could pick up and read, and you'd come to a good end if maybe the author didn't publish another book for another 3 years. Just in case, you never know. So it was interesting to kind of do that with this book and really be like, okay, I'm going to take the crew and everybody we've met in the first book. Now people know who they are. You get a little reminder in the beginning. There's a little short beginning adventure that's meant to reintroduce all the characters again and the stakes and the things we do to tell a story and also advance, again, I don't expect everybody to remember everything. But with Tapestry, I wanted it to feel like a contained adventure. I wanted a slightly different vibe. When I first pitched these books, I said, okay, the first book is Sinbad the Sailor meets Ocean's 11. Yes, my editor was like, say less. The second book, I was like, it's gonna be like a murder mystery, ghost story, kind of horror-esque. And then the third book is Amina Meets the Mummy, but we'll get to that in a couple years. But so with Tapestry, going into it, I knew I wanted it to feel like it had somewhat of a contained feel.
Yeah, and I definitely think that like tone, that genre shift essentially comes through. And I think does such a brilliant job of making it feel so distinctly like an Amina book, and also like, it is exploring new territory and new relationships, and it's really cool. I think one of the things that I loved so much with the first one, and that I've been a little bit obsessed with, so I love storytelling, right? Not a shock. But the framing of the first book it's Amina getting to tell her story in her own words. That's the condition that she sets for herself, to this scribe or scholar, Jamal. And that framing I think is so brilliant, because it not only gives us Amina's fantastic voice, which is so entertaining and just carries, I would listen to Amina narrate anything. But also then with incorporating this scholar character, it gives us opportunities to explore other parts of the world, and you can bring in more of the research and build out more of the world. And there are interludes in the second book that look a little bit different, but kind of are still, using that frame narrative in different ways, and to kind of keep building it out. So I was curious, kind of what was the origin of that? Like, as you were conceiving of Sinbad the Sailor meets Ocean's 11, at what stage did you kind of come up with like having it be framed this way and having this be the way that it's told?
So I conceived of this fairly early on, because the books are meant to be in dialogue with the medieval history that inspires them. And my background is in the medieval Islamic world, which is a vast area that was not only Muslim, that was not only Arabic speaking, and is known for both travelogues, think of Ibn Battuta, and wonder literature. It's what we call ajaib, and it's basically the 1001 Nights, the Sinbad stories. And these were stories meant to entertain, supposedly also meant to educate. And I loved these stories because, one, they really bring the past alive, right? This is not a dry academic retelling. This is somebody who went out to these places and recorded, oh, I went to Socotra and they're all pirates, or, oh, I sailed on this sea and they don't know how to butcher their meat correctly. And it's fascinating. Like, I joke, like, people come to me, they're like, what do you think about Ibn Battuta? I'm like, he was the first angry yelper. And he's fantastic, right? Like, it brings, like, you want the past to come alive. Go read his accounts. He is funny and also like really ungrateful. And there's a lot of stories like that, and often these stories are told by educated men, by the privileged classes, and they don't always speak so great about the working class, about the sailors, about so-called criminals, about women. So in these stories, I wanted to give voice back to the people who were being talked about, to bring a lot of the legends in the wonder literature alive, and not only feature those voices, but also examine, well, why are their stories being told in that way, right? Like, you read the first book, Amina knows the things that people say about her. So she wants to tell her story in her voice, and it's meant to very much kind of wrestle with the idea of what does it mean to be a legend, to have an adventure, when you know other people will shape your own narrative.
It's such a good like meta layer to it, because it's a story, it's a story about becoming a story, and I love it so much. So kind of jumping from there, one of the, in the author's note of the first Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi, then you in talking about kind of your research, you had talked about a lot of this, right? And about the ways that history is a construct, and everything is filtered through the people who get to tell it, and whose tellings of it get preserved. And you talked about kind of having to let go of the idea of like clinging to historical accuracy, and instead aiming for a goal of historical believability. And I don't even know that I have a question with this, except that I would love to hear you talk kind of more about that, and about your approach to kind of the research, and like, yeah.
Of course. So these books are a passion project for me. I was very happy to do the AViD trilogy, but when that was successful enough, and I was like, wait, I can just write a book about my true historical passion, and I can dive into all the research that I neglected and I thought I'd never get to return to. That's great. I'm gonna make it historically as accurate as possible. And there's a character in that first book that is essentially a demon of ambition and overachieving. And that was not intentional at first, but let me tell you, that was some subconscious warning, because as I've told some other people, there are 4 historians who know about the ships of the medieval Indian Ocean to the point where they can describe them. Those 4 have lived over the past 200 years, and none of them agree with each other. So this was very much a process of learning to unlearn, right? Like, I worked with a lot of historians and scholars on this, and getting comfortable with the idea that history is a project of revision, and that's not a bad thing. We're always learning new things. We're always uncovering, well, maybe we should be thinking about it this way, or might this person have said this because they were actually writing for a king or for another reason. So it's getting comfortable with the fact that I'm sure things I wrote in there will be a new discovery, and I'll be wrong, and that's fine, right? Like, I encourage my readers, and I encourage people in general to sort of approach my books and history in general with, wouldn't it be great to learn something new, something that challenges what you thought, and kind of just go with that, be open to that, because that's what history is, right? And the process of this was wonderful, because again, this is my bread and butter. I feel like I know a lot, but I also learned a lot. I had biases I didn't know regarding the use of magic, regarding the use of gender. And it was really fascinating to kind of constantly learn and unlearn various things that I thought I knew pretty well.
Yeah, and I love that kind of getting into historical fiction was the way that you brought your passion for research, found kind of a new home for it. No, you go.
No, I was going to say, there's also another thing I like to talk about when it comes to historical plausibility. If I am a big believer, this is like my soapbox moment, that those of us who are working in historical fantasy, whether that be books, video games, movies, whatever you want to say it, the sort of popular media, we are in many ways creating the image that most of the population has of that period, right? Like, it is a privilege to be able to go take a graduate seminar on the medieval world where you might learn, hey, it wasn't a dirty, dingy hellscape where no one washed. Why do people think that? Well, because that's what's been portrayed in movies and video games and TV shows and everything for so long. And I think we live in an era where a lot of our governments are saying we should return to the past, we should return to this pure ideological fantasy. And I think those of us who are creating the image of that past need to be a lot more, what are we putting on the screen? What are we putting on the page? And part of that is then trying to get as much right as you can. I knew going into this, I wanted to offer a very different portrayal of Muslim women, of people who were queer in the past, that I know is accurate, that people who are, scholars of this know is accurate. But a lot of other people might say, that's not what it was like. I know, I don't know why you know, but sure. So in order to kind of get people to take that journey with me, it was important that the ships had to be correct. Because you can't just be like, all right, trust me on this, but this is very wrong. And I think that's something that was also a major part of the process.
Yeah, no, definitely as someone who writes queer historical fantasy, then it was very much like the queer research, so much of it was kind of weaving together the scraps that we had. And we do have enough scraps to know pretty conclusively that there have been people in every era of human history who have not fit within their society's expectations of gender and sex. And then also, we just don't know a whole lot because of all of the things that you've been talking about. And so being able to be like, well, I can get the ships right, and I can build, a really strong foundation of research. I love that soapbox. So I feel like I kind of got into historical fantasy by accident because I had this idea about this historical sailing ship and a queer crew, and then was like, I'm gonna have to do so much research in order to bring this to life. And once I got into the research, it was awesome, and I have fallen in love and want to continue doing this. But I feel like because of that being my entry point, then I was doing a lot of I already had the story mostly in mind and was kind of doing a lot of research to fill in the gaps. And I think now that I kind of have a stronger foundation, I'm doing a lot more of what were the biases that I came in with, and maybe I'm unpacking, and a lot more just exploratory and letting a narrative kind of emerge out of the research. So I'm curious kind of for you, have you, within this massive world and scope, and as you're kind of looking ahead at book 3, then do you kind of feel like, I'm assuming it's probably much more of that kind of organic because of the depth of your research. But do you feel like there's kind of some of both, or what's your kind of approach on that?
So when people ask me about, sort of how do you balance the research with the writing, I always advocate doing kind of the same depth, right? When you're drafting your story, the very bare bones, that's a good time to do your background research. And kind of as you go further into the narrative and that scene's not gonna get cut, that's the time to jump down rabbit holes. And that can be hard to gauge, right? I know so much about poisons, horrible, horrible things that I never wanted to know. You can't even just say oh, it's poisons, that's cute. No, this is biological warfare from antiquity of it's fascinating and creative, but just, people are awful, and they've always spent way too much time developing things with, I'm not gonna give you the details because I'm sure a lot of you had dinner or going to dinner, and you don't really need to hear these things. I guess if you really need to know, you can ask on my signing line. But I did so much research for a subplot that I was convinced was going to stay in this book, and the entire thing got cut. We're talking a solid month of research, because that was really going to be like crucial to this character's background and how she learned how to do this, and it was also kind of interesting and wasted time. And I think that's also like a process of that I'm learning. For my next book, I'm a medievalist, so now I'm like really learning, okay, well, what would they have known about ancient Egypt? Ancient Egypt, as it turns out, is kind of like a broad period that a lot of people like and a lot of people have written about versus my little like niche medieval area. So it's just wading through the research and trying not to get bogged down in that and being like, the book will never get written just because you think this is really interesting. You know this is not going to be in it. So it's really just kind of, there's no perfect answer, but it's kind of learning to balance, okay, I think this can wait. Sometimes you can just throw a placeholder in. Like you don't need to know what kind of wood the bowl would have been made of until like you're in copy edits. Yeah.
That makes sense. I guess kind of, okay. So again, avoiding spoilers, but there are some elements in Tapestry of Fate that you had kind of specifically called out in the author's note of this book, of that you had maybe taken some more creative liberties with, and that were maybe less pulling from the research and more pulling from the imagination. So kind of what is, as you were developing those, how did that feel different? Kind of how did those originate? I'm just curious of like, what was the process there?
So the process was that when the first Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi book came out, and I mean the day it came out, I was in the hospital with postpartum preeclampsia, trying not to die, because that would have been really medieval motherhood of like me, which is a joke I can say when my husband's not in the audience, because he doesn't like hearing that, weirdly. But I had a very complicated pregnancy, I had a complicated coming back to that, and my health was shot really for a lot of that first year. And I was trying to come back from maternity leave while negotiating childcare issues, healthcare issues, my brain feeling like Swiss cheese. And I opened up this new draft and I got to write about a motherhood dealing with childcare issues, coming back and trying to find yourself after. And I just noped out at a lot of points. And then I had to do research. Like, I couldn't do research. I had like an hour to write between when this little child and older child needed me. And I was really having a hard time. And I think especially like, this is also why I write about people who are middle-aged, because I'm looking around, I see some people who are my age. You're not as sharp. Sorry. As you used to be. And I don't outline. And I was trying to do all these things and hold the shape of a story in my head. And I got to a point where I'm writing these things and I wanted to have sort of this really great criminal scene. There was going to be a tavern brawl. So I'm trying to figure out the exact layout of certain streets in Basra in this period and going out of my mind. And I remember thinking very specifically, write fantasy. Make it up. Just make it up. Guess what? It's a secret criminal city and it's floating and they're not supposed to talk about it. They're not supposed to talk about it now. It's not in the sources. That's it. It's done. It works. And it ended up getting me out of probably the worst writing rut I've had in my entire career. It's my favorite scene in the book. It was so much fun to write because all of the crazy criminal details are real because there is nothing that they liked better in the medieval Arabic documentation documenting things. It is the language of bureaucracy. Like everything is just super, super detailed. You needed inventory, we have it. So I got to write this scene that I loved. And then as I was doing that, I was like, wow, this is like a lot of fun. And I started just really leaning into some of that creativity. And I went an entirely different direction for the antagonist, for the transgression that they're retrieving. And I got to invent my own world and my own mythos and really play with a far older history in a looser way than I'd done before. I joke, okay, like so much of this is based on the actual folklore. If you've read the first book, Raksh and the Spirit of Discords, he's my own, entirely my own, and I wanted it to feel that way. I wanted him to feel like he was older and almost primeval. And I kind of leaned into that more with the second book, and I loved it. I was like, wow, it's great to just make things up sometimes. As it turns out, it saves you a lot of time.
I love that was a revelation.
It was a revelation.
Because I just feel like for many, and I feel like now I'm having the backwards thing of I'm realizing that oftentimes the things in the real history are far more interesting.
They are often, yes.
But you have the balance and they integrate seamlessly. Yes. Because I did not know what was based on the real research and what was not until the notes at the end. Because we all love research and Aaron told me when I was preparing for this that we were allowed to get in the weeds and everything. Yes. So you have a captive audience. What was something interesting from the research that you would be excited to talk about?
Only one thing?
Or many.
Oh my gosh.
Or many.
So I love a lot of the roots of this story. Like before I even thought I was going to be a writer, but just some things that stuck in my head is when I was young, like 22 and living in Brooklyn, I was going to a sisters group at my mosque, and we had a very intense imam who, instead of like doing theology with us, would be like, you're going to learn all about the women of the past and the way they took care of their lives and didn't rely on men because the young men of this age are useless, which, I was like, Okay, what do you tell the brothers? I'm super curious. And I remember he had this book and he had these accounts, and these women lived incredible lives. There was this noble woman and if you've read Amina, you'll understand the process of this. She's a noblewoman, one of the richest women in Cairo, and she's going on pilgrimage. And when she goes on pilgrimage, she marries a sailor when she's crossing the Red Sea. And it causes a whole scandal because why would you, this is a class thing, this is an issue. But she holds on to the fact she was allowed to marry him. And because I'm a terrible person, not because I'm a terrible person, I was also given this advice by some of the elderly ladies. If you want to have certain relationships, if you think a man is attractive and you need to keep it halal, get married. You can do that, as long as you properly divorce, you can do that as many times as you want. And I remember reading across these accounts of women in the medieval ages who were clearly living by that ethos. And I thought that was amazing because that's just something we're not told nowadays. And there were other accounts like that. There were these business women who had children out of wedlock and were fighting with their sons to make sure that their funerals were going to be the best and the splashiest. And so it's I like to read a lot of true accounts, whether we're getting letters from people complaining about their in-laws or receiving dowry list of what exactly you would be on the hook for your daughter. I think these true accounts are fascinating, and we have so many more of them than I think people realize. Yes, when we're working with history, especially from periods a long time ago, we have a paltry amount of evidence that is what survives, is what gets written down. There's all sorts of biases. But there are certain places where we have a lot. And this time and place is one of them. And I think we should really give voice to the past and be inspired by that, because it's fabulous. I mean, these people had fabulous lives, and they were living their lives for themselves, not so that, centuries later we could be let's bend this to our political narrative. So I've really enjoyed that a lot. And if I can skip, this is a terrible part, but I work on a lot of legal records. You find a lot of information in legal records that you can't get otherwise. And people have always been obsessed with true crime. There's this whole absolutely. I'll give you two examples because I'm off script at this point. And for the first example is there's this medieval terrible crime spree in Cairo, and it's this couple that they've been luring children into their home, and there's children in the audience, giving them candy and putting them under the floorboards. And it becomes a sensational case, and people are following along, and the whole trial goes. And I remember reading that and thinking wow, everybody would be watching all of these Netflix documentaries on true crime. There's something in the human psyche that's obsessed with this. Or even if you've read...
Things never change.
Some things never change. My character of Delilah, she's from the Banu Sassan. The Banu Sassan are a true crime guild, and they wrote poems celebrating themselves. Horrible, horrible things. The worst, lewdest, rudest things. If I published them, even in the United States, I would be brought up for charges. And it's just, and they're boasting, right? They're saying how awesome they are in all of these various ways. And I think that's amazing. This is exactly the same thing. You have battles now of I'm gonna diss you in a rap. That's exactly what this is. And it's just funny. People are just, some things don't change.
Yeah, I feel your whole ethos of bringing history to life and being these people have always been people, and the stuffy historical records that you think of, that's not what life was. People were living lives.
Exactly. And it makes for a great story because I really just like to imbue my characters with that exact sort of vibrancy.
Yes, I know. Make sure you're getting your questions in. I see them collecting them. So one of the things, I know that oftentimes within stories like this, then there'll be one outstanding woman in this male-dominated world, and she's the only one. And part of what I really loved about Tapestry of Fate is that we get a lot more of Delilah. We get a lot more of the relationships here, and Amina's world was always filled with other fantastic female characters, but I think we really get to dive into that some in Tapestry. So was that something that you kind of always envisioned for book 2, to kind of keep developing that relationship?
Absolutely. I always knew I wanted book 2 to really delve into Delilah's background as much as she's willing to give up. And also examine female friendships, because not only do we have not a lot of older women or mothers in fantasy, we don't have a lot of female friendships. And when you do see female friendships, often they're between younger characters. It's the found family first coming together. And I wanted to examine what it looks like when those friendships have age behind them. Not only of, okay, when we were out younger, we were dashing about having adventures. That's easy to do. Go dash about having adventures when you're young. Add 15 years to that, and maybe some quiet judgments. And when you're family, right, you fight with family a different way than you'd be like, oh, an acquaintance. Like family, really close friends, sometimes you can dig that knife. And I wanted to really examine a female friendship where we have two women who've gone in very different paths, right? Like Amina has a family, she has all the responsibilities that come along with that. Dalilah has sort of devoted herself to her passions, to her career. And, how does that look like when they're coming back together and trying to find a place in each other's lives again? So it was something I always really wanted to examine, to show an established friendship and a friendship that might, I don't want to spoil things, but undergo some tensions.
I mean, you just laid out the tensions there. Like, yeah, it's.
Those are the only tensions in the novel. That's it. No, there's nothing else happens. They just I disagree with your direction in life.
Our first question ties in very nicely with this. So it says, between Amina and Nari, you seem to love writing the stories of tall, statuesque, extremely physically and headstrong women. Who or what is your inspiration?
First, I have to say, I don't think that Nahri is very statuesque. I always kind of imagine her as sort of malnourished. My inspiration for writing strong women, I like to write strong characters. And I think that's almost not a trap question of why do we write strong women? We're writing women, and women in all different sort of aspects. I know personally, this is the answer I can give because it's not being recorded. I have come from a very long, strong line of women who can be quite frightening at some points, and would very much you're going to be on your own, can't depend on a man. And I think that's something that I always wanted to pay credence to, but I just also women are strong. Amina is a single mother. That takes a lot to survive.
Yeah. And her world is populated by women of many different kinds and proclivities. And it's wonderful. All right, as a special collections librarian, I have to ask if you have any favorite manuscripts or if there are any libraries or librarians you want to call out as helpful to your research.
Okay, so the collection is very old, but the collection that really got me down on this path is, it's not even it's a library collection because it was a library collection hundreds of years ago. But in Cairo, there was something called the Geniza. And essentially, in Jewish belief, you can't throw out papers that have the word God on it. So for nearly 1,000 years, from about 800 to 1800, in this one synagogue in Cairo, not even in Cairo, in Fustat, which is sort of the older city, they would just stuff things in a repository. And we know almost half of what we know about the medieval part of this world comes from this repository. And it is exactly the voices of regular people. You have letters, people who are very upset their son has gone missing on a voyage down the Red Sea. You have people saying that their son-in-law is useless and they would please divorce him, he's getting you nowhere. You have dowry lists. You have all these sorts of letters of regular people. And I learned about this collection when I was in Cairo, actually, in their rare books library, which is as magical as it sounds. And a lot of the collection is now in Princeton, for all the reasons you assume. But it's just the idea that we have these voices, and the voices and the lives they preserve are spectacular.
That's incredible. How important are tropes when writing fantasy, and how do you approach their use?
I have a mixed relationship with tropes because I think they can be fun because, sometimes when you're reading something and you're like, oh, I think this is going down this certain path, it can be fun to subvert it. I can say, oh, I write about found families, and oh, I like found families, I'll read that. I will say the one thing I'm not a huge fan of in tropes have grown as sort of a marketing thing, and that's great. Like if you're looking for a certain book, I am a pain in the ass that I like to be surprised. Like the only romances I like are the ones that are unexpected, which I told somebody at my publishing team once, and they laughed because they thought I was joking. They're like, that's not a thing. You're not allowed to do that. I was like, well, why can't you be allowed to do that? So I think they can be good as however you want to take them.
Yeah, and the unexpected, I'm like, well, this is why you're not writing romance genre, because you can have romance in any story.
And it's not a judgment. Like a lot of people are like, sometimes you're like, I want that. Like I have a particular protagonist that I like of like, the certain thing, like Murderbot. Anybody who's read Murderbot. Like when people are like, this protagonist is like Murderbot, I don't care what genre it is, I will check out that book. So I'm like, yes, I am here for my emotionally damaged, part of gold, just really socially awkward weirdo.
Yeah. No, exactly. Tropes are useful for finding the things that you like.
Yes.
You recently shared that research for Amina 3 was quote unquote chaotic. What are some of your, I guess we've kind of touched on what are some of your favorite stories about researching across all of your novels, but also I would love to hear more about the chaos of where you're at the moment.
So it's wading through one, just because there's been so much written about ancient Egypt, and so much of it is not correct. There's this very much assumption of like, well, we all just discovered everything when the Europeans came in because they didn't like those things there. And I'm telling you right now, I'm working in the medieval period, which the only people in Cairo are local people who are speaking Arabic, people who are speaking Coptic, Persian, and they were really interested, right? Like the pyramids have been a tourist site for thousands of years. We have graffiti there that predates the Romans, predates the Persians, predates all of our modern religions, and it's been fascinating to really dive into what they would have known in the medieval period, how the landscape would have looked. I think I accidentally stumbled into the origins of the word mummy. Like there was always, it was an idea of like, oh, mummy is a dumb word. The Europeans made something up, they were wrong. No, there is an account. He's a physician from I think like just about 1200 or like the later 1100s. Because he's a couple decades past my period. And he's a physician from Iraq, and he goes and he's visiting Egypt, and he's talking all about the antiquities and admiring them. He's measuring things. He's talking to the locals. Well, what do people think that they did here? What do they did here? And he talks about momia, which is a Persian Arabic loan word, which was used for bitumen, like a sort of resin that they used on ships. And in Iraq, this is used for exactly that, bitumen. It's a black wax-like substance. And it starts being used there to describe the black wax-like substance that seeps out of mummies. And it's a very lucrative ingredient, apparently. And it's been used for hundreds of years for everything. And it's people wax. And I remember reading this, and it's sold everywhere. And like then I found like an earlier Coptic account, like they're talking about, this was about the, I guess, AD, BC, whatever turn, and they talk about how the mountains were full of mummies, and that the bitumen, the people wax was very popular, and then like 1,000 years later, there's not really mountains of mummies anymore, and you can figure out where all the people wax went. And I'm reading this, and I'm just like, one, the origin of the word mummy, okay, that makes sense, and two, wow, I'm sorry to the ancient dead of Egypt. It's been about 3,000 years of being desecrated. So, yeah, that's not new.
All right. If you were shipwrecked with only 2 members of the Marawati, who would you most want to be with you?
That is easy. Tinbu, because he can actually fix ships. He might get some practice in some of the books about that. And if you were going to get off the ship, it would be with Tinbu. And probably between Amina and Majid, Majid's a good navigator, but Amina can read the stars better and seems better at general survival aspects. So probably those 2. Yeah.
This is kind of a process one. What did you learn from the David Bad trilogy that you applied to Amina or are continuing to apply?
Oh, wow. That's actually like one question I've never been asked before. I think not even so much like learn, but like going in different directions. Like when I finished AViD, I had the experience of writing a very contained trilogy where it felt like you're telling one story that's broken into different parts, but it's very like, you read book one and curse the author and you're like, well, I guess it's good, book two is available. Whereas with Amina, I wanted them to feel all like contained adventures. I would also say like I'm like an introverted people pleaser, and I wasn't aware that like when I published books with certain character arcs, people are gonna have really strong emotions and like tell me they hoped my husband died. Yes, no, I'm fine with it now. I mean, it didn't happen, so like, God keep him. But that was sort of like the process of just like, and being like comfortable with that. Like you're a storyteller and you kind of like, you got to tell the story you want to tell. And sometimes it's going to go in directions people don't want. And then it's also the directions that lots of people want. Like it's kind of amazing to put out one book and just see so many different reactions to it. Like it's like, I used to find it scary. Now I'm just like, wow, life is a rich tapestry. Tapestry, there you go.
Tapestry of Fate.
So I think now like I'm a little bit more confident on like the like professional author aspect of putting the book out in the world.
Makes sense, yeah.
At least until people read the last 2 sentences of this and I go offline for a few months. But it contained I've been joking. This is a standalone story as long as you don't read the last line. So have at that.
I know that books take the amount of time to write that they will take, and it takes the time to make it good, and you should get all of that time. And I'm also dying to read where book 3 goes because of the last 2 sentences. Do you read modern fiction with Islamic themes? And as a convert, how does your background inform your writing?
I mean, my list of like books that I want to read is, I can't even tell you. So yes, I'm always looking for books by other Muslims because like that's a part of my life and often I want to shout out those writers. But the idea of conversion honestly played into Amina a lot because I wanted to write about somebody who was coming back to faith. Somebody who's, I mean, we meet her and she was a pirate. She did some terrible, terrible things. And I don't think we have a lot of stories, and it's not even just Muslim characters. I mean, we have like 12 stories of Muslim characters. But, of characters in general who hold on to faith and religion or come back to it. And this is not me to be like, religion is great. Like I just told you, I have a historical background. I have a very, very understanding place of religion and history and violence and all of those lovely things. But religion is a huge part of human society, kind of like whether you like it or not. And it's one of those things I think is often missing in world building. Because again, like people have always reached for something, found stories to tell about life, to explain things. So I want that informed in my writing and kind of having characters who have that and have different relationships with it.
What is your writing process and habits like? How do you get the words in between motherhood time?
Poorly. No, I don't have, or I didn't have a great writing process until this book took me 3 years to write and broke something in my brain and was like, you know what? Maybe your writing process should not just be a handful of scattered notebooks and your memory. That's not really like, maybe this is why it takes you a long time to write books. My writing process, and I have finally come to terms with it, is that I am a pantser. I like to go in with certain benchmarks I want to hit, or like, this is the place it's going to take place. I like the idea of this happening, and then kind of find out who my characters are. And it's really enjoyable to do this in a sequel, because I know who my characters are, and I can kind of throw situations at them and think, how would they respond? All of that said, that sounds all pretty and nice. My first drafts are a trash fire. I mean, they're not even chapters. There's just whole scenes that are bullet marks of like, I don't know what I want to do here. I could do this, I could do this, and then just try to move on. And that used to cause me a lot of stress and anxiety, and now I kind of embrace it because I know that's going to happen. And once I get to an end, even if it's like the worst, most patch mark, like it's not even a story, it's like a net. I have a better idea of that whole story that I'm trying to tell. and then I can kind of go back and fix it. So I tell people who are like aspiring writers and are really stuck on, I don't know what to do next. It's okay, you can embrace that. You can write, I don't know what I want to do next, and just write the next thing that gives you energy and joy to work on.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of just putting things in brackets, and then you can just Control F for the brackets and be like, oh, this is where all the gaps that I
never thought to do the Control F for the brackets.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes, that's the way that you can double check that you didn't leave all the holes, because
Yes.
there are so many
Yes.
holes. Yeah, as someone who does not write in order, then people who can just like start the story and just keep going are baffling to me. But yeah. Let's see. At what age did you realize that you wanted to be a writer? And do you have a book that inspired you to write?
I realized I wanted to be a writer about when I was working on the Empire of Gold, and it seemed like this was going well. No, I did not want to be a writer. I come from a working class family. I was the first person in my whole extended group to go to college, and I did not even contemplate a career in the arts. Like, that was not what people went to college to do. They went to college to get secure jobs in as humanities professors. How things change. So I just didn't assume I was going to be a writer. I wrote fan fiction. Like, that was my writing process. I wrote fan fiction and then was like, maybe I'll try to write my own story after I graduated college, and I was like in a very lost period of my life, and just started writing this story that would become The City of Brass. And I used to not tell this story. I'd be like, no, I have an MFA. I've done workshops. No, I haven't. Now I'm like comfortable with like, you can be a great writer. You can find success and critical acclaim, and it can be because you read a lot, because you practice a lot. And that is my fancy background.
Yeah, and also, for the record, fan fiction is a fantastic place to build your writing skills.
It is, because it kind of like gives you a scaffolding to work on. Like, you have some ideas and rules and a world, and you can kind of just like see what you like to write. So I'm a big proponent of fan fiction.
Yes. What inspired your love for the medieval era, and in particular, Southwest Asia and Northern Africa?
So I've been a history nerd since I was a little kid. Like, I was one of those kids. My grandmother won a set of encyclopedias once, and like I would just take them down and read various entries. I joke, I dressed up as a Titanic survivor when I was 11, which was before the movie came out. So I've always really loved history, and I've like loved different periods for parts of my life. But there was something about the medieval world, and it really started when I was studying in Egypt, because I was like, didn't really know if I should do history or if I should just get like a government job, whatever that meant, like something with a secure paycheck. And it was those stories and those accounts, because they kind of felt, and I love a lot of like, my next books will probably be a lot earlier in history, because I've been like really into the Bronze Age. But there's something about the medieval, and there was something about this particularly urban medieval part of the world where the people just felt very familiar. And that's not to put modern terms on the past, but there was just this idea that you could have someone who was just a bookseller, or somebody who was a tax clerk and went and did his job for sort of like terrible, corrupt government, and went home and to his family and was telling stories just like we tell stories, and that they I'm a New Yorker, like living in a city life, even if it looked very different, just felt very vibrant to me. And it really just was something that spoke to me deeply in a way I don't really understand.
I'm curious about this one as well, because for the first book, then I was bouncing back and forth between audiobook and print book. Did you get to pick the audiobook cast? And if so, how did you choose, and what kind of factored into that? Because they're fantastic, for the record. If you have not listened to the audiobook, highly recommend it. I saw that you have the same two voice actors for the...
and a third.
Nice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I picked the voice actors. I was very adamant that I wanted to have control over that, because I wanted this to feel kind of like, you're listening to a sailor talk about their yarns, and to have that attitude. And they originally sent me a list of voice actors, and I was like, I don't know. Some of these don't really feel right. And I don't even know. I was like toying around with Audible samples, and I heard the voice actress who does Amina, and she was doing it. It was like a contemporary story. I think she was literally on the subway, and she was just bitching about something. And there was something about that voice. I was like, you, it's you. And they knocked it out of the park. And as soon as I heard the production, I was like, Harper, we need to get them back. We need to get them back. Like, they are Amina and Jamal. To the point, like, even the voice actress for Amina, Lemise, like, direct messaged me recently, and she's like, are you coming to LA? I'd love to meet you. And I'm like, you're cooler than me. Like, that doesn't even make sense. I invented the character. But they do a great job. And I was very excited because I pushed them to add a third voice actress for this book, because we have a different point of view, a new point of view, a very different point of view. And I was like, we need to have something that feels unfamiliar.
I'm so excited for that now. Great. I mean, this is a big one, and you don't have to pick favorites if you don't want. Who is your favorite character to write, and why?
Oh gosh. Okay. This is very hard for me to answer. So I'm going to twist the question, because I got a very interesting different take on it last night. I often get like, who's your favorite character? Who do you see yourself in? But I got asked, what was the character who taught me the most about writing? And that is very easily Dara from the AViD trilogy. The ooze. Yeah, that's always, yeah. You guys were in my emails, I know. But I loved writing his character, and I actually had to be pushed to write his character, because when I was first writing the second book, The Kingdom of Copper, he didn't have a voice. I was like, he's a pawn, he's not allowed to have a voice. And my agent and editor were like, that's stupid. Like, you could be, his story is so interesting. And once I started writing it, I loved doing it because it was a challenge. Because Dara is a character who, in many stories, he should have been the hero. And unfortunately, he goes the path that I think is more likely for a lot of people. Like, right, we are, again, I said this earlier in the chat, we're all living in an era where a lot of our societies are trying to call back this imagined past, and we should hate those people, and those newcomers are terrible. And this is unfortunately the story of humanity. We've all done terrible things to each other. And the idea that to protect your family, to protect your people, from very often very real violence, is at its heart the root of so much more violence. All like human conflict, when it's not like meddled by politicians, is essentially, I need to protect my people because you're going to hurt my people. And I wanted a character who went the very unfortunately realistic path of following that line, of doing, if I have to do anything to protect us, to save us, what lines won't I cross? And going and crossing those lines, but at the same time, and I guess this is, I mean, the book's been out long enough. If you want to read the AViD trilogy and don't want to know the ending, just like plug your ears or something. But at the end, I wanted to offer a path out of that. And I know that was very divisive. Like, some people were like, he's a war criminal, he should hang. Other people were like, but I love him, he should have everything in the world, he was misunderstood. He only committed 2 genocides. But I wanted to find a thornier path, that it would be so easy for him to like die redeeming himself. And that doesn't do anything for the society that he leaves behind, for the victims that he leaves behind. I wanted to offer a short but visible way of like, people can realize they've made mistakes, that they've done terrible things, and that they can try to atone for it, right? Like, I like the idea of atonement rather than redemption. Atonement is work. Atonement is putting in for the people you have done wrong. And that, writing his whole arc and really delving into that was something that I think made me think about characterization more than anything else I've really had done to that point.
Yeah, I guess kind of going from there, this is less of a writing question, but a little broader. Where do you find beauty in everyday life, and how does it inspire you?
Oh man, I mean, the very easy question for that is, I am a mother. And as much as I write about the stresses of motherhood, and this is actually a topic I haven't really gotten to talk about here too much tonight, because that was a major part of these books, of talking about how parenthood can be very difficult, motherhood can be very difficult, and trying to find yourself after that, trying to make place for like, what are my dreams still, or how do I balance this? I always wanted to have the idea, and this is my joy, that your children bring you unparalleled joy. As much as they bring you unparalleled stress, unparalleled joy. And I look, unfortunately, into the abyss a lot of both history and the newspaper. And I try to just be like, but I find joy and meaning and purpose in my children.
I think, how difficult was it to add magical and fantastical elements to a world that's real and grounded and kind of based in this research?
It's not difficult at all, honestly, because I'm working in the medieval period and magic is real. Magic is accepted. And that's also, first of all, we in our modern era still have magic. You go tell somebody like, I'm going to knock on wood, or we have all of our holidays. That is our own version of magic. But it was in many ways easy, and that was something I really wanted to represent with the medieval world, was the everyday place of not only would you, from the highest to the lowest, right? Like, first of all, some of the highest paid people in this world would have been court astrologers. This was a science. The occult was a science. In the book, Jamal is a scientist. He would have been an incredibly respected scholar. The same people who were doing surgeries and innovating and leading sort of this Islamic golden age were also astrologers, were alchemists. This was a very respected science. Then you also had the smaller magics. You had, a little amulet to keep like the evil eye away, a certain not magic you might do so you'd hope to get a good husband. Speaking of motherhood, there was an exhibit, this was probably like 10 years ago, and it's from the medieval period, and it's a tiny amulet from Egypt that could be used to get your children to sleep. And I looked at this, and my firstborn was colicky. And like, there's a term, low sleep needs babies, which I found horribly apt. And I saw this, and I was like, mother, I get you. And it made it into the first book. And like, this was just an everyday part of life, and I really wanted to show that. So adding magical and fantastical elements was not difficult at all.
That makes sense. This is also an interesting one because, in theory, the book, as we are reading it, is theoretically a translation into English. How do you keep your characters from sounding too modern in a historical setting?
Oh, this was hard, and this is something I wish I got asked more often, because if this book was correct to language, it would be told in an extinct Sea Creole that is impossible to represent, with some classical Arabic thrown in. And I like to be accurate, but I really don't think that would have done well for my sales. And as I mentioned, I have children and they need to eat. So I tried to really take a lot of different ways. One, I tried to look about how other people were translating contemporary accounts and kind of think some of the phrasings that people might have used, some of the ways that, okay, this person says this for pirate, this person says this for pirate. This is how these people curse, this is how these people say this. And kind of do a mix with that, because I was also telling a story about a crew of criminals who speak all sorts of different languages. They're going to have their own jargon. They're going to have their own more casual way of speaking. So it was kind of really trying to thread the needle between what are some historical examples, what is sort of the modern parallel for that. Like, I was trying to think like I've worked in like food service and stuff where you often have people from all over the place who speak different languages, and you kind of end up having like a mishmash of terms, and kind of like having that feeling almost, and having some swearing, because again, the medieval accounts are so much more vulgar and full of, like, you wouldn't think it, like, you'll be like, I thought you were a pious scholar, like, you just came out with something that, I know that's a translation, but that couldn't have ever been polite. So like, there is, I got a couple reviews, they were like, they curse too much. I was like, sister, you have no idea.
This is the toned down version.
Yes, this is the toned down version. But it was an interesting thing to play, because I did want sometimes for the language to put my reader in the mind of reading about a crew of outlaws or a crew of criminals that might feel a little more casual and modern.
I think we are at time. Thank you so much to Shannon for being here for AViD. Talking to us tonight. And thank all of you for our AViD crowd, for your fantastic questions, for your supporting the library, for turning out tonight. Thank you so much for being here. So Shannon and I will both be signing books out in the hallway. Again, Beaverdale Books is right over here selling copies. And then I also wanted to remind everyone about the next AViD event. We've got Tayari Jones, the author of Kin, is going to be here at the Central Library Monday, June 15th at 7 p.m. So mark it on your calendar, and we would love to see you then as well. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much for coming, and I'm going to give the plug. Go do everything they asked you to support your public libraries. We are incredibly fortunate in this country. We have the best public library systems, and they're all under assault right now. So call your representatives, donate, make very clear that this is a resource you want your communities to protect.